Okay, good morning, everyone, and welcome to our safety connection on the 2026 to 27 MLITSD Retail Campaign. My name is Sean McCormick, and I will be one of your hosts and presenters today. I'm a senior health and safety consultant with WSPS, been here for about 12 years now, and I'll let my two co-facilitators from the Ministry of Labor, Immigration, Training, and Skills Development introduce themselves. So Ron, we'll start with you.
Thank you, Sean. Yes, I'm Ron Landry. I'm the Senior Manager of the Industrial Health and Safety Program at the Occupational Health and Safety Branch. We provide advice and guidance to the inspectors across the province in the industrial program, and it is industrial inspectors that would be conducting the campaigns that I will be speaking to today. Over to you, Lisa.
Thanks, Ron. Glad to be here. My name's Lisa Hooper. I'm the provincial ergonomist, as well with the Occupational Health and Safety Branch within the ministry. And my role at the ministry is to I'm a coordinator for sort of the ergonomic services within the ministry and supporting the inspectorate as well as our field ergonomists in the ministry who will be conducting the MSD and prevention retail campaign that I will speak to today. So thanks for joining us, and hope you find the session today informative.
Okay, thank you. And we do have a small ask. We have the MLITSD Demographics Collection Survey. This is a short survey collecting demographics on behalf of the ministry. Responses are completely anonymous. No personal information is collected. To fill in this survey, if you could please click the link on the screen, or it was also posted in the chat. You will need the function number, which is 232698. So just give everyone a moment to fill that in. And while you are filling that in, I'll just go over some of the basic tips and tricks for using Teams. So I will say that this session is being recorded and it will be published to our website in several weeks. So all the information contained, you can go back and rewatch it in the future, or for those people who are watching this as a recording, welcome. We are recommending computer audio. It does provide more seamless and easier process, but phone conference is also available. For the safety connection, both your microphone and your camera will remain muted and off for the duration. We will be answering questions at the end of the session, but please feel free to enter any questions in as they come up, and we'll just simply scroll through the chat and answer them at the end. Reactions. At any point in time, you can click on the react icon, and you get a bunch of different reactions that are possible, like a thumbs up, love, clap, laugh. So that's always available. There will be no polls throughout this presentation, but there is the meeting chat. Feel free to send messages at any time. Like I said, questions we will answer at the end. If you would like to turn on live captions, you can click on the three dots at the top right of the screen, language and speech, turn on live captions. Please note that these are completely AI generated, so they might not be fully accurate. It depends on how the AI is feeling that day. And if you do want to go to full screen, you can click on the view and then go full screen. I don't suspect that's needed, but it's an option if you would like. The goals of our safety connections are allow learning, sharing, and discovering what you value. It allows us to virtually connect together. And the great thing with it being personal is we're able to connect from across the province into one shared community. And we're good. I will pass it over to Ron now. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Sean. So just a typical disclaimer here. So we are sharing information with you. This is not legal advice and should not be considered as legal advice. And the legislation provides a minimum standard only. And that is what we enforce at the ministry, is the minimum standard is prescribed. Of course, we encourage you to go above and beyond, but the orders in compliance with those orders is to the minimum standard as prescribed. And it's the responsibilities of all individuals in the workplace to ensure compliance with legislation. So everyone owns a piece of it. Just wait for this to come up for a second here. 1 second. Okay, so I'm going to be going through the overall goals. I'm going to give you an overview of the 26-27 retail campaign, which is currently underway as the beginning of April. I'll give you the timelines. We're going to speak to the MSD Prevention and Retail Campaign, 26-27 Industrial Retail Campaign, key focus for inspectors, and a number of resources that we have available to you. So the goal of today's webinar is to raise awareness of the two concurrent campaigns that we're running in the retail sector this year. So the Industrial Health and Safety Retail Campaign and the Musculoskeletal Disorder Prevention in Retail Sector Campaign. So both running at the same time this year. So the key is to understand the requirements in the Occupational Health and Safety Act and its regulations as they relate to the workplace, including musculoskeletal disorder hazards. To increase knowledge of general hazards in the retail sector with an emphasis on MSD hazards and contributing factors that impact manual material handling demands for workers. To raise awareness of the risks related to material handling from a ladder, to provide assistance, a resource to assist retail workplaces and health and safety compliance and continuous improvement. So a number of resources to support your internal responsibility system, as well as additional resources in general to support health and safety in the workplace. Oops. So again, as I mentioned before, we are running two concurrent campaigns. They are both year-long campaigns. On the industrial side, preventing workplace injuries and illnesses that may result from unsafe work practices, raising awareness of key health and safety hazards in the retail sector, and ensuring that workplace parties understand and comply with their legal duties. On the ergonomist side, musculoskeletal disorder prevention in this sector, and reducing occurrences of falls from ladders associated with manual material storage and retrieval at heights. So the campaign timelines for both campaigns running from April 1st through to March 31st of 27, partnering with WSPS, and WSPS is hosting the webinar, providing compliance assistance and resources. And the field activity for both campaigns from April through to March of 2027, with enforcement throughout that time period as well. So a lot of resources, as you'll find through the presentation, available not only through the ministry, but also through WSPS to help support you. So I'll now hand this over to Lisa to go through the MSD portion.
Thank you, Ron. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about sort of the scope of the MSD Prevention Retail Campaign and give you a little bit of understanding of what to expect from a visit from one of our ministry ergonomists. There we go. So starting off, why should employers focus on ergonomics? Your workplace really is a work system that has people, it's got processes, policies, rules, workspaces, and equipment that exist within it. And ergonomics takes a worker-centric focus, placing the worker at the center and considering if the worker has everything that they need to perform well in that system. And when they perform well in that system, there's reduced injuries and illnesses and increased effectiveness and productivity within that system. So people often hear ergonomics as fitting that workplace to the worker, ensuring that those work demands meet the worker's needs within that system. So to put it in a nutshell, the worker needs, first to understand the task that's being performed, to be aware of the hazards that may be present, to understand the necessary steps to do the task safely, to recognize the equipment that can be used to perform the task safely, where to find it and how to use it. They need task demands that are within their abilities. This could be strength, it could be reach, it could be a visual demand or capacity. And they need an environment where hazards are controlled that can impact the safety of completing that task. It could be temperature, it could be the nature of the work surfaces, lighting, the workstation design. So all of these things in the system, there's needs that can be supported to make sure and allow workers to perform the work safely and efficiently. And doing this can help reduce the potential for discomfort and injuries. And why are ergonomists focusing on retail? MSDs account for roughly about a quarter of the total claims for the retail class, reportable claims, with some subsectors of the retail experiencing even much higher rates than that. And what we find, and I'm sure all of you on the call today are very aware, manual handling is a very repeated activity that happens within the retail space because of the product's movement within your workplace, from receiving to unpacking, storing, transporting, stocking, point of sale, customer assistance, and delivery. There's all along those steps, there's product being manually handled by workers. And the material handling task can expose workers to sometimes cumulative demands that can result in a musculoskeletal injury, or an overexertion demand that leads to a more immediate overexertion injury. Similarly, we're also looking at sort of material handling as it relates to the use of ladders, because often in retail spaces, storage is at a bit of a premium, and the use of devices such as ladders, step stools are employed to be able to place and retrieve loads. And when we looked at some industry stats, between 2020 and 2024, we did find that the second highest injury count for lost time ladder-related injuries was in the retail sector. And when I looked a little bit closer, among these ladder-related injuries, the most prevalent injury was strains and sprains. So it's another sort of nuance that there may be some musculoskeletal issues associated with the ladder use and material handling. And the storage practices within the workspace may have an impact around this. So let's look at sort of that from an ergonomic lens, the safe lifting and moving and storage of materials in the workplace. This is kind of a busy slide, and I apologize for that. But if you look at the middle, it's really about maintaining that balance between the work demands placed on a worker and the worker's capacity. We need to kind of keep that in a balanced state to ensure that the worker is not at an increased risk of experiencing an injury. And the things around the outside of this circle are factors that can influence, either in a negative or a positive way, these work demands or the worker's capacity. And by sort of keeping in mind these sort of contributing elements and ensuring that they positively impact the worker to perform the task in a safe way and maintains the work demands within their capabilities, we can take an approach that is a little bit more systematic. So I'm just going to stab at a couple of different examples here. If we look at load characteristics, you have a large box that doesn't have a label on it. You don't know if it's a shifting load. Can be very hard to manage. Those characteristics can have an influence on that worker's the work demand, it impacts the work demands, and the workers' capabilities need to be able to match the demands of that task. And without sufficient information about those load characteristics, we can increase the level of risk to that worker. Similarly, you look at your storage design. What does the storage look like in your workplace? Are there really deep racking type shelving that requires a worker to have to work or reach to the full depth of that shelf in order to retrieve a load? Or is there, very high shelving in the workspace, and the different types of things stored on those shelves can increase the potential for a musculoskeletal injury or a fall when trying to retrieve that load. So all of these sort of factors that you see around this circle here are things that you can look at in your workspace to optimize material handling. Environmental conditions, that could be temperature, it could be lighting. The condition of equipment is really an obvious one. If things are not in good condition, higher forces might exist. Worker training is key. Are they aware of the hazards? Are they aware of what the safe practices are to perform the work? So again, keeping an eye on the center, which is sort of keeping that balance between your work demands and your work capacity, but knowing all of these things around the outside are things that you can have control over to ensure that workers can work safely within your workspace. I'm going to shift gears a little bit here and just talk briefly about what an inspection from a ministry ergonomist likely involves. So many people on the call might be familiar, they maybe had a visit from a ministry inspector, but maybe not a ministry ergonomist. So there are ergonomists that are also inspectors, but their focus and their specialty is in ergonomics. And there are not as many of these folks as there are inspectors around the province. But again, these folks will be out doing visits to retail workspaces. And initially what they'll do is they will conduct what we call a little bit of an administrative review. Again, staying on that focus of that MSD prevention lens. They might ask about sort of the health and safety activities and the requirements required under the Occupational Health and Safety Act. So that might be talking about your Joint Health and Safety Committee or your health and safety rep, workplace inspections conducted at the workplace, as well as kind of the required health and safety postings. They might also ask about, have you had musculoskeletal type injuries in your workplace? And if you have, or if you've got some early signs and symptoms of those types of injuries occurring, what sort of tasks or jobs they might be associated with. They might ask about, what sort of health and safety policies you have around musculoskeletal disorder prevention. Do you have measures or policies for MSDs, safe material handling practices, safe ladder use, storage practice requirements, these sorts of things. And lastly, they're could ask about the training that your workers receive related to MSD prevention, safe material handling, hazard awareness for musculoskeletal disorders. Subsequent to their sort of that administrative sort of discussion, they'll do a walkthrough of the workplace. And again, being ergonomists, we like to look at people when they're performing their work and doing tasks. So they'll observe work tasks being performed, lifting, moving, placing, retrieving materials, and that could be in any sort of step along those processes. It could be in the receiving area, or out on the sales floor where they're stocking shelves, or at that point of sale area. Again, you're just kind of getting observing sort of work tasks and work environments throughout the workspace. They may gather some measurements to better understand the musculoskeletal disorder hazards observed in and the risk to workers, looking at the weights of the materials and loads that have to be handled, where they're stored, the location they have to get to, and that sort of thing. And lastly, they might look at equipment and tasks for transporting and moving and accessing loads. So your ladders, your carts, that sort of thing, to ensure that they're suitable for the task and they are maintained in good condition. The ergonomist will provide a field visit report to the workplace. It'll include a narrative that will summarize the findings of their visit. There may be orders to the employer where contraventions have been identified, and they may also include requirements for the employer to assess a particular work activity for a potential hazard, such as a musculoskeletal disorder hazard, to determine if there is any increased risk to workers. And also, as we mentioned in our prelude to this presentation, we'll provide some resource links, because again, to give employers and workers resources to help satisfy the requirements under the Act, but also to gain more understanding around MSD prevention in the workplace. I just wanted to kind of go over briefly, following that product path through a retail workspace, just examples of some of the MSD risks that we've come across in the past. So just, generalized, when we see product that's stacked beyond functional reach, anytime you're trying to handle something that is kind of outside of your functional reach and you're at the sort of tips of your fingers, you don't have good load control. There is more potential for that load to slip and fall, and you try to regain control of it, increasing the potential for musculoskeletal injuries. Product weights that might be above shoulders. Again, as humans, we aren't as strong if we're handling something above shoulder level. We're not able to kind of bring in the strong muscles of our legs and back to kind of contribute to that lift. So, where you store heavy materials can have an influence on the risk to workers in terms of a musculoskeletal injury. Poor access to pallets and storage shelving can lead to awkward foot placements, twisting and reaching. So if we have really jam-packed areas with not a lot of travel space in between, that can lead to potentials for injury. Repetitive and high-paced lifting is another, often in some retail spaces, products are brought in and they're not palletized and they're all hand bombed to get into the workplace, producing that repetitive lifting and lowering activities. Products unloaded from boxes at floor level. So once we you're unloading product, all that work done at low level just means someone's having to maintain a static stoop position while they're performing that task. So again, simple things in terms of providing work surfaces to be able to work in a more upright, comfortable posture is a really simple strategy there. And again, those large, I mentioned this earlier, large, awkward, shifting, unbalanced products that are handled by a single worker, often where there isn't any sort of distinction from, the box itself, what they might be in terms of that material handling, that can sometimes be a higher risk of MSD. Now, moving to that sort of storage, stocking, display sort of areas within the work environments. Some of the things that might increase MSD risk: products stacked beyond, again, that functional reach, heavy loads stored in hard to reach locations. So again, like really awkward sort of crouching positions, or those really elevated, working at the above shoulder positions, handling large boxes above head level when on a ladder. Again, that has a significant impact on our balance. And trying to retrieve something as soon as we look up when we're on a ladder, that automatically sort of creates a little bit of a sway. And then you add a large load in the hands as well, can impact the balance of that worker and impact the sort of musculoskeletal risk as well. Twisting, turning, leaning with loads on in the hands when on a ladder. Again, this workspace design and putting a ladder in it with limited space, is it the only way to get a load down and hand it down to somebody means they have to rotate on a ladder. So looking at, again, think of that that diagram at the beginning, how those contributing factors can play a role on the demands of that worker trying to perform their task in a safe way. Materials in front of shelving, again, stuff that is takes a worker farther out from the area that they're trying to reach from on a ladder, and increases the potential for tips and falls, as well as longer horizontal distances for handling loads can create risk at the low back and shoulders for musculoskeletal injury. And again, that poor housekeeping kind of runs through all areas where it just can prevent the use of, tools and equipment, as well as increasing the demands because you're having now carry loads through an area. Transporting product, some of the MSD risks that we kind of can see there. Overloaded carts with no visual sight line leads to people pulling a cart instead of pushing. We're stronger and in more optimal postures when we're pushing. If we are trailing the cart behind us, our shoulders are in an awkward posture, which can lead to increased potential for an injury at the shoulder. Carts that are in poor condition, they're going to potentially require higher forces to move them, so keeping them in good condition. Uneven surfaces, ramps, raised transitions on flooring can increase the forces to move carts. So looking at those transitions, whether it's in the receiving area, whether it's in and out of storage locations, coolers, freezers, those transitions can create kind of like a sudden stop with those carts, introducing sort of a higher peak force. As well, looking at whether the carts that you have are a good match for the environment you're asking them to move in. Carts with different size casters larger casters might be more robust to manage rougher surfaces, whereas small casters are going to get jammed up and create more potential high force situations for workers using them. And again, that poor housekeeping runs through in this area as well. If you can't use the cart at all, then you're ending up having to carry loads, which is a higher demands on the worker. And lastly, at that sort of point of sale and customer service side of things and our material handling, heavy products lifted and carried for customers, again, are there measures in place to support workers who have to do that task? Is there good training involved so that in terms of, placing loads into trunks and that sort of thing, we know that loads that get further away from the body, the greater the risk of sort of that back injury. Workstation design. So your point of sale workstation design can introduce awkward postures. It could be the height of the monitor, the location of the monitor, introducing kind of a static twisting motion of the neck, the height of the keyboard, the height of the belt. Any number of things can influence sort of work posture. Repetitive reaching, grasping, and turning of products during scanning. Again, good practice, is to introduce, motions where you're not doing, strong wide span finger grips on things and trying to rotate your hands. So workers need to understand that type of hazard and what the good practices are to try to mitigate the risks associated with those types of practices. And again, that poor housekeeping sort of runs through making sure that, being able to use carts where we can. So that just sort of summarizes some of the MSD risks that we see in those areas and what our campaign is sort of focusing on. I'm going to hand it back over to Ron now to speak to the Industrial Health and Safety Program campaign. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Lisa. So I'm going to be speaking to the Industrial Health and Safety Retail Campaign. We're doing something a little differently as far as deciding what campaigns to do this year. So historically, when we're determining what campaign we're going to do, we look at, all the critical injuries that have been reported in the previous year, and we look at the root cause, and what contraventions were behind those critical injuries, and then we'll say, okay, we're going to focus on that hazard. So, for example, last year we did material handling. And then what we do is we go to one of the main sectors where we may find material handling, and that's where we end up going. This year, we're doing something a little differently. What we did is we looked at the various sectors we kind of flipped it on its head. So we looked at the various sectors and said, where are we getting the most critical injuries from by sector? Okay. And then we're going to go to those sectors and we're going to focus on numerous hazards that we know from reporting may be occurring in those particular sectors, what areas of focus. So we start with the sector and then go to the hazards within that sector. So we're doing retail, we're also doing education and farming and agriculture. But today's presentation will focus on the retail campaign. So we're going to focus on the most common hazards faced by workers within the sector. So again, we're looking at the various hazards that we know of just from reporting, and we're going to focus on those. So these are identified as having the highest number of reported critical injuries or events as opposed to the hazards themselves. So that data from 2024 indicates the retail sector continues to rank second in critical injuries reported to the ministry. So reported as critical, and then we do our investigations. If it comes in as a critical, it stays as a critical on our recording, and we do our field activities accordingly. So inspectors will be paying particular attention to workplaces where there are new and young workers, and where there may be temporary help agency workers. So we know that these folks are particularly vulnerable. They don't necessarily have a long work history with the workplace, may be new to the country. So we want to ensure that they are getting all the support they need to work in a safe manner. And we also know that many of these workplaces could be small businesses. And so we have resources specifically tailored to small businesses because they don't have the big corporate resources. And our Health and Safety Association has resources specific to small business as well. So we're going to pay particular attention to these common hazards that we're aware of from our data. And these, we're not limited to these, but these are the key areas of focus. Material handling, including manual material handling, slip, trip, and fall hazards, lifting devices, machine guarding, eye wash facility requirements where required, electrical hazards, and WSPS. So making sure that safety data sheets are available and that workers know how to access them and have been trained on them. Some of the administrative focus, maintaining equipment in good condition, training and orientation provided by the employer, supervisor and worker awareness training, which has been available for free online forever, and we're still finding a lot of folks haven't done that. Posting a copy of the Act, preparing and reviewing at least annually a health and safety policy, compliance with sections 8 and 9 of the Act, which is the worker representative and joint health and safety committee requirements, and compliance with sections related to workplace violence and workplace harassment. So 3201 to 3208. So these are the main areas of focus. So then what folks are always wondering is what to expect during the inspection. Some folks may have had interactions with the inspector, but many have not. There are folks that believe that we get to every workplace in the province every year. Absolutely not. We do not have the resources to do that. So you may or may not have had an inspector in your workplace. So the inspector is there to enforce the minimum standards of the Occupational Health and Safety Act and its regulations based on the facts that they find at the time of the inspection. The inspector has the right to enter and be granted access to all areas of the workplace, so nothing is off limits as far as walking through the workplace and checking things out. When inspector arrives, they introduce themselves, explain the reason for the visit, and they will ask to have a worker and management representative accompany them during the inspection if they are available. There are circumstances where one or the other is not available, and we'll continue with whomever is available at the time to do our inspection. And the inspector may conduct an administrative review and a physical inspection of the workplace. So the administrative side is looking at any sort of documentation, for example, Health and Safety Committee meeting minutes, or any other documentation that they may want to look at. Just to see on the paper side of things if everything is in place, required postings, things of that nature, before walking through the actual workplace. And they may do a portion of the workplace, or they may do the entire workplace, depending on the scope of the inspection and the size of the workplace. So if an inspector finds a contravention, they could issue an order. There's various types of orders. There's timed orders, planned orders, stop work orders. So the typical order, you have a timeline to comply. and sending you notice of compliance. A stop work order, you have to stop that particular work until the inspector re-inspects and lifts the stop work order. But any orders will be documented in a field visit that is left with the workplace parties, including a notice of compliance form, which is how you let us know when things are complied with. And the stop work order is issued where there's an immediate threat to the worker health and safety. So that's where the stop work comes in. And a field visit, again, lays out everything that needs to be done. Anything that is compelled to be done will be in an order. There also is a detailed narrative portion of the field visit, which could provide additional information, resources, and speak to the nature of the field visit that was conducted and where they went. So inspectors are there to determine, to support the internal responsibility system by ensuring compliance with the Occupational Health and Safety Act and its regulations. But as you know, with the internal responsibility, everyone has a piece of responsibility, not just the employer, it's the supervisor, it's the worker, everyone working together. So some of the key areas that we look at for the employer is ensuring the equipment, materials, and protective devices provided are maintained in good condition, that information, instruction, and supervision is provided to workers to protect their health and safety. So you want to ensure that the workers are competent to conduct the work, which is competency is knowledge, training, or experience, unless there is some other, education requirement or certification requirement specified in the regulation. Acquainting a worker or a person in authority over a worker with any hazard in the work, in the handling, storage, use, disposal, and transport of any article, device, equipment, or biological, chemical, or physical agent. So it's a pretty broad range of responsibilities there. And of course, 25(2)H should take every precaution reasonable in the circumstance for the protection of a worker. So 25(2)H is sort of the catch-all order. If there's a hazard to a worker and that hazard is not addressed by either an applicable regulation or a section of the Act, then we use 25(2)H to address that particular hazard. So of course, supervisors have responsibilities as well, ensuring that a worker works in a manner and with the protective device measures and procedures required by the Act and the Reg, ensuring that any equipment, protective device, or clothing required by the employer is used or worn by the worker, and of course used or worn properly and is appropriate in the circumstance. Advise the worker of any potential actual danger to the health and safety of the worker in which the supervisor is aware. So it's ensure that your supervisors are competent in the tasks that the workers are being assigned. For example, if the worker is driving a forklift and your supervisor knows nothing about forklifts, they could be doing something completely unsafe and the supervisor wouldn't pick up on it unless it became really painfully obvious. So you want to ensure that your supervisors are competent. And of course, taking every precaution reasonable circumstance for the protection of the worker, which is basically the supervisor version of the 25(2)H. And looking at enforcement compliance, additionally, looking at the awareness training, as I said before, it's available free online, but we still find quite a few workplaces that have not completed this, and there is links provided here for folks. So the top 10 enforcement actions. So this is looking at 2025 in the retail sector. What are the top 10 contraventions that we found last year? So 45B, safely transported, placed, or stored, 368 orders. Section 11, floors kept free of hazards, 363 orders. Section 46, secure against tip or fall, 311 orders. 51(1)B, lifting device inspections, 233. Typically that's certification, but yeah, looking at maintaining the equipment. 49B, securing a compressed gas cylinder, 107 orders. So a compressed gas cylinder, wherever it is in the workplace, needs to be secured so it cannot tip or fall. 24, guard or exposed to moving part, 101 orders. 124 sub 1, providing an eye wash facility with 92 orders. Section 25, guard in running nip hazard, 78 orders. 123.1, which is fire code requirements regarding fire extinguishers, with 74 orders. And 123 sub 2, fire code requirements regarding exits, 65 orders. So those are all the orders in the retail under the industrial regulation. So these are the top 10 in retail under the Occupational Health and Safety Act for 25. 25(1)B, maintaining equipment in good condition, with 663 orders. 25(2)H, which again is the take every precaution, the catch-all section, 495 orders. 25(2)A, posting a copy of the Act, 426. 25(2)A, providing information, instruction, supervision, so that's your training, 290. 25.2J, prepare and review a health and safety policy, 274 orders. 8.1, selecting health and safety rep, 266. 54.1C, which is producing a document. So this is where an inspector's requiring an existing document to be provided to the inspector, so 259 orders. 32.011C, review the violence and harassment policy, 183 orders. 32.06 sub 1, developing a written harassment program, 142 orders. And 32.101 sub 1, review the policies in post, 132. So just to give you an overall view. So that's, all of the orders under the Act. So I'll pass it back over to Sean.
Okay, thank you, Ron and Lisa. So now we'll sort of build off of what Ron and Lisa said, and talk about how WSPS can help, as well as what are some of the best practices that we can look in. So few common questions that we have had quite a few times. Am I required to work with WSPS? The answer is no. We are here to support you. There's many things, and we'll talk about many of them that we do provide, both free, and then there will be some that are at cost. But there is no requirement to work with WSPS. We hope you do, though. Is there a cost? The answer is possibly. So at WSPS, we do support ministry visits with free consulting services. Some limitations there, but it will be free. We have lots of free resources and downloads available, and there will be some things that there will be a cost to. And what type of support? Well, really, when you're working with us, it'll typically start with an account manager coming on site. That's your main contact person, who, in many cases is also a trained safety professional, but they're just making sure they're answering those sort of simple questions. And if it's something more complicated, they pass on to a consultant or a specialist with the expertise in hygiene, ergonomics, like myself, machine guarding, general occupational health and safety. And we're doing everything from certification training, program development, to in-depth, specialized services like air and noise assessments. So we really can help right across the board. So let's talk about these main areas that the ministry will be focusing on. We heard a lot about slips, trips, and falls. So a few tips that we have. We do want to ensure that there is a housekeeping policy and procedure, and also that housekeeping is in good condition. If there are spills, there's a procedure to identify them and clean them up. Another thing that we've all probably saw a lot with wet floors is we have that wet floor sign down, and it just stays down until at some point someone decides to pick it up. It's important that we do, the simple things like remove that wet floor sign when the floor is dry. Otherwise, people just get used to seeing a wet floor sign and it becomes meaningless. I'm sure this is a pet peeve and a struggle for many of the workplaces here, but keeping the mats in good condition. I know we need entrance mats, especially during the winter, spring months, when the floors are just getting soaked from all the snow and rain people are trudging in. But we also know those mats have a habit of bunching up, posing a trip hazard for both our staff as well for our customers, which we don't want. So making sure damaged mats are replaced, or there's a different system that's less likely to bunch up, such as a built-in one or a more robust mat that doesn't bunch. Improved even lighting, especially in areas such as aisles, stairways, where you might be missing a step, in entrances and those transitions from a bright to a dark area. Another one that can be useful is our footwear. We often don't think about the footwear that us or our staff are wearing, but the difference between a slip resistant shoe, if you're working in a potentially slippery area, and a non-slip resistant shoe can be remarkable, and the added grip that those shoes provide. And of course, conducting routine inspection of the walking surfaces, making sure there are no trip hazards, spills, etc. There's no damage to the flooring. Ladders. So we'll start with the hierarchy of controls here, but can we eliminate the need for ladders? Sometimes the answer is yes. A few of the things we could look at would be storing more frequently used things in areas where we don't need a ladder, or are we able to use a long-handled tool like we have in a lot of clothing retail locations where you can pick it up with the tool instead of having to get a ladder to go up, grab that piece of material and lower it down. Another one, and I'm sure we saw this too many times either at work or in our personal lives, but using something other than a ladder as a ladder. Things like the blue box, garbage can. I know I've saw people standing on rolling carts while getting stuff on the top shelf and just sort of pulling themselves along. None of those are ladders. They're not rated for capacity. They have an increased risk versus a ladder. And then the types of ladders. Overall, we would rather see a rolling ladder used versus an A-frame or extension ladder. Rolling ladders have the platform, locks, they're much more stable, they have handrails. They do provide a higher level of safety. That being said, they take up more space and are hard to maneuver. Another ladder pet peeve of mine, making sure that we have a grade 1 or 2 ladder, not a light duty ladder. Light duty ladders are rated for 200 pounds. And that rating is for the worker, all of their clothing, and anything else that they're lifting. So if we're looking at a ladder with a 200-pound capacity, it might not be enough for many of your workers. I know myself, I cannot use a light duty ladder because I'm over 200 pounds as soon as I pick anything up. So please do take the time to look at the ladder capacity. It's something that we see a lot because naturally light duty ladders will be a little bit cheaper than those heavier duty ladders. Another gap that we see is not training workers how to use ladders. We think of ladders as something we all just know how to use, right? We all probably have a ladder at home. We've been using them since we were kids to reach different things. We never think to train workers how to use ladders. And that does end up leading to some of those bad practices, like overreaching, where your belt buckle is not still between the rails of the ladder, or going too high up on the ladder, right? So we do want to ensure that workers are trained on how to use ladders safely and how to inspect for any damage. And then make sure that all uneven surfaces and flooring are properly maintained and we're setting ladders up on even surfaces and they're not wobbly, which are putting our staff at increased risk. MSDs. Lisa mentioned that MSDs are one of the leading causes of lost time in retail and honestly, in every industry. Lisa also mentioned the flow of goods, right from shipping and receiving, where we receive it, all the way to a potential customer carryout. The thing that we do want to highlight here is we might be really good at portions of this. We might be good at the receiving portion, the backroom stocking, but then we have, point of sale or carryout where we don't have training, things aren't well designed for our staff in those locations. And unfortunately, if we have a weak point along here, especially in small locations where 1 or 2 staff members are doing all the steps, it really can increase that cumulative strain, leading to injuries. The other thing is, if we look at our flow of goods, it will reduce the risks of injuries. It will reduce time pressure because everything's where we know it's supposed to be. We thought through the locations. We put stuff in the back room in an area where it's easy to find and easy to access, which save our staff time when they need to go to the back to grab something. And it just helps right through improving the flow for both your staff, yourself, and your customers. So it is important to think of the way material flows and the way people flow through the location. We will be sending the links out to these documents in a follow-up email. But one of the tools that we developed last year are what we call our Ergo Insights. And we have these for lifting, pushing, pulling, and stalking. So these are some simple tools that are very visual, and you can see an example of one of those visual images, just going through some of the best practices and where we should be putting things. So when we're looking at product receiving, one of the big things we want to do is minimize how far forward workers have to reach. As soon as you start reaching further and further forward, the forces through the body go up very quickly. And what could be a safe lift if it's in close to you becomes a high risk lift at arm's reach. I think this makes a lot of sense to people, but we might not always think of it in receiving and then product storage. But we want to put the heavy objects within our power zone, which is sort of that waist to chest height, or even a little bit below the waist to chest height. We want to minimize lifting below knee level and above shoulder. Do we have room? Doing safe lifting where we are engaging the quads and the glutes and keeping the back in a neutral position, it takes up more space. So if people are in a very narrow area, they're going to be twisting. They're not going to be lifting with their legs because there simply isn't room. And again, use material handling equipment for unbalanced, heavy, awkward loads, or have multiple people who do a lift, right? So it doesn't have to be complicated, overhead cranes. It can be things as simple as, from trucks, dollies, or carts that make a really big difference here. Where should we be storing things? And this is something that can both help with MSD reduction as well as potential sales. But we do want to optimize our locations in the back room and then on your displays. Our ideal zone, like I mentioned a second ago, is sort of that chest to waist or mid-thigh level. This is also a good display level where people can easily see things, right? If things are overhead height or below knee height, it's hard for our staff as well for our customers to see and pick up those items. In the back room, another thing we want to keep in mind is how frequently are we accessing things. More frequent items should be within that ideal zone. And then heavy will go a bit lower and light will go a little bit higher. So again, it's just thinking through where we keep stuff, not just putting stuff in any location we find. Transporting. This goes against what a lot of people like to do naturally. Just react if you have that habit of trying to carry the groceries in one trip, regardless of how many bags you have. It's gonna be a thumbs up or a clap if you do that. It can't just be the ergonomist. So I see you do. Yeah, I know it's a bit of a human reaction that we have to try to do that. Even if it does end up taking longer because we're juggling, 6 bags, trying to get the keys out, open the door, have the dogs come in and jump on us, knock the groceries out. Ask me how I know about that one. But at work, we can make that a lot simpler. We probably have a cart. Use the cart, load the cart up. We can fit a lot of material on one cart versus trying to carry all. It's much safer. We're going to maintain good balance. We can leave it and come back to it if we need to. The other thing to think of is, where do you keep the cart? Is it somewhere where you can actually get to easily? Because realistically, are people going to walk across, a large store to grab a cart, to bring it back to where they need it, to load up a couple boxes, to move it, then to put the cart back across the store? Maybe not, right? So storage locations in larger facilities might become important. Lisa talked about wheels and casters. This is another one of those safety geek pet peeves of mine, but we do need to make sure that they are maintained in good condition, right? I have dealt with some carts where even with just a very light load on them, the wheels were so jammed up, they're barely moving. It took a lot of force to move them. Subsequently, I've moved hundreds of pounds on carts with good rated casters that have felt effortless. So that difference can be huge. If they do become worn out, replace them, either the wheels themselves or the entire cart if the wheels aren't replaceable. Lisa also mentioned inspecting the floor. And again, If you do have a rough or uneven floor, you might want a larger wheel or caster that can roll over it, or you might want a pneumatic one instead of a hard one that can go over, bumps in the parking lot easier. And then housekeeping comes back, but make sure the area that we have to travel and move in is properly maintained. If people need to stop and pick stuff up, move it out of the way every 10 feet, they're not going to use the carts and devices used or that are designed to reduce our risk. Struck by. This is another risk that we don't necessarily think about in retail, but there are quite a few struck by incidents that occur. Many of these will be things like materials falling from one level and striking a worker. So we do want to ensure if we're placing things higher up on shelves or racks that secured, it's not likely to tip or fall off of it. So that even might just mean some plastic wrap around it to secure it if boxes become damaged, like we kind of see up in this top corner with another box on top of it. I'd say that's one that could collapse and fall and strike a worker. And both from an MSD and struck by, we want to have lighter items on those higher shelves and minimize that above head storage. Ladders. I'm sure many of us have faced this one before. We want to use the ladder to get to something. There's a whole bunch of material stored at the base of the shelf. So what does that mean? Are we going to actually, when we're in a hurry, move all of that material so we have a clear access with the ladder? I hope so, but realistically, we've all probably saw that not happen. So what happens is people climb up the ladder and they're overreaching, stuff potentially falls, the ladder tips, potentially the worker falls, right? So these are all concerns that we have. And then making sure that we have safe procedures around our loading docks and interacting with any delivery vehicles, as well as safety procedures in the parking lot for carryout, right? We do have risks of our workers being struck in those areas by vehicles. So just consider the controls that you have. Are you requiring high vis in these areas? Often that is a best practice. People unloading the delivery truck, put a high vis vest on before stepping out that back door. I did touch on this, but when we are using mechanical material handling, we do want to use those pallet jacks, carts, conveyors that are available. We want to ensure that workers are trained. We think, do we have to train a worker how to push something? And the answer is yes, there are improvements that can be made. Where we're positioning our hands, close to belly button level is ideal, directing the force through our low back, not pushing up high or down low. Recommending that people push instead of pull, like Lisa said, that keeps the body in a more controlled posture. Maybe restricting pedestrian access during mechanical material handling, like using any powered equipment, maybe even pallet jacks or pump trucks, making sure that we have the proper footwear in place, making sure that we have steel toes if we're using these lifting devices. We hit a couple of them, but with our PM, and Ron mentioned this as one of the common issues found, is that there haven't been inspections on the equipment. There isn't preventative maintenance in place. The equipment is not being maintained in good condition. So we see that quite a bit with things like our pallet trucks. Do we have any pre-use checklists for our lifting equipment, especially our powered lifting equipment? Are workers trained on it? Have they actually been trained on how to use that piece of equipment? We know it's mandatory if we're driving a forklift, but have we trained people, especially when we're talking about our new and young workers, on our other lifting devices? And then making sure that the load limits of our lifting devices and any racking or shelving structures are known, and we're ensuring that we're not overloading those limits. So again, just some more tips and best tricks for our lifting device and for material storage. Okay, now I'm going to throw a couple ones that people might not think about. Machine guarding. Talking retail. Where might there be machine guarding in retail locations. I'd like anyone to put this in on the chat. What types of machines might need guarding in retail? One major piece of equipment I'm thinking about. Anyone have it? The major one I'm thinking about are things like your compactors, garbage and cardboard compactors. When you actually stop to think about it, exactly, Aaron, same wavelength there. Those are really quite terrifying pieces of equipment. There's a huge amount of force, and they're often in remote locations, outside or in the back area of a mall. I also think back to my time working in fast food, where really there was minimal training on how to use the compactor. It was just open the door, close it, push the start button, right? Nothing else really trained. So we do need to make sure that we train our staff how to use them properly, but also what to do if something goes wrong. What happens if it jams? What do we do? What's the procedure? You know, ensuring that those guards and interlocks are never removed or defeated. I'm not going to say how to defeat a guard, but many people know how to do it relatively easily, right? Cardboard compactors. How do you eject the bale? Who ejects the bale? That's a high risk activity that we might not want anyone to do. So we want to make sure our staff know those procedures. If we are doing any service, make sure the equipment has a lockout tagout procedure and that's followed and implemented every time we do it. There will be a few other ones that we might have. We might have some things like some slicers or other small machinery. We do want to ensure that we have lockout tagout procedures in place for those, even some of our potentially simpler equipment, and that we have workers trained in the safe use of it. Another one that we've all probably done and probably all saw before is extension cords. Extension cords are designed for temporary use. They're not designed as permanent wiring. Another major hazard that comes with our extension cords is they provide a trip hazard, right? So if we do temporarily have to run them across the walkway, we want to ensure that that's secured in place, whether it's taped down, mats you put over it, etc., to minimize that hazard. So again, it's a hazard you might not think about all the time in retail, but it still does exist and still can be a high hazard. Another one that was mentioned was eye wash stations. That might not be one that jumps to our mind when we think of retail. We think of retail, we think of minimum amounts of chemical used, but there still often are chemicals. They're often cleaning chemicals or sanitation chemicals. If you do review the safety data sheets and they say the emergency procedure is to flush the eye for 15 minutes if you get in the eye, we need to have an eye wash station capable of 15 minutes of flow. So one of those little, 250 ml bottles will not provide 15 minutes of flow. We need to have the eye wash stations available. Workers need to know where they are. They need to be clean and accessible. The other part is if we have chemicals, we need to have our WSPS program in place. That includes both generic, which is how to read the safety data sheets or labels, as well as the chemical specific training. Right? How do we actually use these chemicals that our workers are using? How do we handle them, store them, dispose of them? What happens if there's a spill? And then make sure workers know where the safety data sheets are. Okay, moving into the last few slides for me, and then we'll have lots of time left for questions. So those are the hazards. Now let's talk about some of the administrative requirements, because I know for many workplaces, these might be some of the things that are unclear or not yet in place. So Ron did mention that supervisor and worker training. It's been required for years now. It's absolutely free, but all supervisors and workers do need to go through it. We need to have records that they have gone through it. Another one that's very simple is having a copy of the Health and Safety Act posted in your workplace. If you do not have that, you can reach out to us, we can help. Or it can be as simple as going online and printing out a copy of the Act in the dominant language of your workplace. Health and safety policy. We have a template linked here for health and safety policy, but you do need to have it posted, and it needs to be reviewed and signed annually by the senior person on site. We talked about having a worker representative for workers under or over 5 and less than 20 workers, or a JHSC for workplaces over 20 workers. And those members need to be posted on the notice board. Another thing that's required is our workplace violence and harassment assessment. The good news is we just launched this month a new tool that's absolutely free, that's self-serve, that can help with this. It's our new workplace violence risk assessment tool. You can click the link here. It will be in the email as well. I'm going to spend a minute talking about it. And we have, I believe Ron mentioned, the WSPS Small Business Center. Lots of resources on violence and harassment and sort of everything to help with small businesses, including a really useful handbook generator, employee handbook generator that's absolutely free for anyone to use. So that link to the Small Business Center will include that. So our workplace violence risk assessment tool. I am super excited with this tool, but it's a guided digital tool that walks you through evaluating your workplace violence risks. It includes the nature of the work, site layout, work conditions. We know in retail, workplace violence and harassment is potentially a top risk. You do not need to work in retail long before you've had a threatening customer come in. Everyone I know who's worked in retail has stories. So it is a requirement to have the risk assessment done, reviewed by the committee, and posted. So this is a completely free tool. Upon completion, you receive a digital report identifying your hazards, your controls, and recommended mitigation strategies. It's self-directed, or if you want, it could be facilitated by a WSPS consultant. The two options are fully up to you, but it really is an exciting new tool that we're receiving lots of good feedback on. Pardon me. And we're not going to spend the time to go over all of these resources, but we do have a list of resources from the ministry, going over everything from material handling to temporary help agencies. With WSPS, we have a lot of free resources, covering all of these hazard topics we just talked about. I will mention that WSPS does assist any firms that received orders from the ministry with free consulting. It has been a really successful program and something that I'm pleased to announce is continuing in 2026, 2027. So if you do happen to get a visit from the ministry, there'll be more information on that field visit report there. And we also have lots of manual material handling and ergonomic resources. Myself as an ergonomist, I have helped out with many of these, and I find them to be very useful tools. We have a thank you slide, but questions. Does anyone have questions for myself, Ron, or Lisa? I'll invite Lisa back on too. We have about 20 minutes, so lots of time for a question period. Questions? I'll start off with a generic one just to, we have people typing in the chat. But Ron and Lisa, what are some types of questions that an inspector might ask or look to see on a site visit?
I can start off. There's typically it starts with the administrative side of things. So you're looking at the required postings, policies, programs, joint health and safety committee, if there is one, if it is required. You're looking at the minutes. Typically you'll ask for, when I was an inspector, I would always ask for the last 3 meeting minutes so I could see, whether or not things are being addressed, whether things are carrying over. and to checking on the function of the committee. And then the physical inspection of the workplace, typically I would start at the back and work my way to the front in the retail application, because typically where there's issues, it's going to be in the back room. So your compactors, your heavy equipment, your loading dock, things of that nature, and then move out to the retail area. Typically things are safer in the retail area because you've got customers walking around that don't have any idea on health and safety. So you need to kind of go extra special in the retail public areas. Pass it over to Lisa.
From the ergonomist perspective, again, similar to what Ron mentioned, there'll be some admin questions, but again, sort of focused towards the experiences at the workplace. Sort of, have there been musculoskeletal disorders reported? The ergonomists often will sort of engage with workers that they see as they're walking, doing their walkabout, and just sort of ask them, how they might approach a particular task, or, what task they might find really challenging to perform during their when they're working. Again, from a sort of just thinking in terms of specific questions that might come across, they're often, when an ergonomist wants to know a little bit more about a particular task, they might be asking specifics about how often does a certain task have to happen? What are the weights of the loads that might be a worker might have to lift when performing the particular task? So very sort of more pointed at trying to understand if there is a potential MSD risk associated with something that they might observe during the work.
Thank you. Another question, that this is one that I've been asked quite a bit. Is a pump truck a lifting device?
I would say in my personal experience, it's not a lifting device, but it is a piece of equipment that has to be maintained.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any more questions? We have a number of people in the room. I'm sure there's some questions. It's a great opportunity.
I think one of the things as well, is on an inspection is that, as I mentioned before, health and safety is everyone's responsibility. So we're there to support the internal responsibility system. So for example, if I was to walk through a workplace and I see a worker not wearing eye protection when they should be wearing eye protection in a particular circumstance, I'll talk to the worker, are you aware of any hazards? Are you required to wear safety glasses? If you are, where are they? Why aren't you wearing them? So that's at the worker level. But then the next part of that conversation is, have you ever been told to put them on? Have you ever been told it's a requirement? And then followed by, well, who is your supervisor? Right. So then when I'm done talking to the worker, I'm going to talk to the supervisor, because it may be a condition where the supervisor hasn't informed them of the hazard or hasn't ensured that they wear the safety glasses, hasn't enforced that requirement. So they talk to the supervisor. And if the supervisor's answers aren't appropriate, then I'll ask the supervisor, well, who do you report to? Okay, that manager. Now I'm going to talk to that manager. So, and it works all the way through. Everyone owns a piece of it, right? So there could be an order for eye protection. There could be a ticket, right? There could be a ticket to the worker for not wearing it. There could be a supervisor ticket for not ensuring a worker is wearing it. There could be an employer ticket for not ensuring the supervisor is enforced. It's all, you have to consider the whole food chain, right? It's not just the employer. It's not just the employer, the supervisor. It's not just the worker. It all has to work together for it to work properly.
It's all three parts of the IRS. Yes. Very important. Do inspectors typically offer employers some flexibility or guidance when they find areas of non-compliance, or do they typically go to orders or compliance commitments?
So it can be an order, or it could be a compliance commitment depending on the circumstance. Typically compliance commitments for low risk admin type of a contravention where, it could be, the policy wasn't posted, but they have the policy. So they're like, well, okay, I'm just going to go into my office, print it off and put it up there, right? Typically an inspector's not going to write that order. They just write it in the narrative as a compliance commitment. So it can be a compliance commitment or an order, or like I said before, even a stop work order on the extreme side of things, depending on the individual's circumstance.
And again, if there is any, like I know the ministry does not provide guidance or tell you how to fix it, that's where WSPS can come into play. Where if you're unsure how to fix something, how to deal with it, contact us. We're happy to help. That's our role within the safety system, is helping there. And like I said, when it is around ministry visits, there is often going to be no charge for that.
Yeah, so the inspector can't tell you how to fix the contravention. They can point you to standards or regulations that may provide information or provide additional resources in the narrative. But typically, it's making offering to make a referral to a health and safety association such as WSPS to help them out if they, they just don't understand the requirements of the legislation. But the inspector is not allowed to tell you how to correct it.
Thank you. Okay, I do not see any more questions in the chat. So thank you everybody for your participation. I hope you learned some information that was new to you, can help you out. If you do have any questions, you can reach out to both the Ministry of Labor, Immigration Training, Skills Development, or WSPS, and we'll be glad to help. There will be a follow-up email coming fairly shortly to everyone who attended. So thank you and have a great day.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Have a safe day.